If I told you of a place that proved realer than what we call real life, would you even believe me? That's the question. But even as I finished that proposition, seedlings of dispute were sown into the gardens of your mind, were they not? And do I sense the words dreams, heaven, or hell someplace in those thoughts? Maybe coupled with the accompanying suspicion of my lunacy? If so, that is quite ordinary. And although such terms will not suffice, I can certainly imagine why those metaphors were drawn. If I myself was faced with such an inane inquiry as this, with the supposition of a realm realer than reality, then I too would proceed to disprove and disparage the fool that had proposed it. That is, if I knew no better. But I do, unregretfully. And I'd never dare deprive you of the chance to visit such a place yourself. So, I'll ask you once again, would you, could you, for perhaps the first time since the caustic demise of your childhood fantasies, entertain the prospect of a realer, truer realm than the one you currently inhabit? I understand if you find that difficult. I've found a great many who struggle with it, as one's capacity to believe diminishes over the years. But if there is any room left in you for exploration, then I have something for you. Residing within my carmine red heart is the power and intention to actualize that prospect of a realer realm. Yes, I could reveal to you this proverbial stairway, or at least unleash your ability to discern it apart from all lesser things, by recounting just one story, the story of my own visit to that exalted place. I could start recounting it now, but as already suggested, reluctance holds my tongue, and unequivocal is the reason why. You simply are not yet mentally prepared for this. Those initial seedlings of skepticism are still resident within you, I'm afraid, and they're burgeoning into something even more obstructive to my aims. This is the very burden I am now fated to since my return from that place. The burden of cultivating an unwavering depth of trust, faith of the greatest fortitude, in any who will listen, as I plead them not to turn me away, to even let me finish speaking, if nothing more. You see, in my attempts to recount this happening to others, authentically and with due respect to every detail still extant in memory, I am always confronted with this inevitable obstacle, the question of validity, the almost truculent skepticism that is so often evoked by stories like this one. So, what does that skepticism look like? Sound like? Over the years, I've noted the many forms through which the listener's doubts materialize, and concluded that these doubts are far more alike than different. Perhaps quite like your initial objections, I often hear the following statements in response to my recount. You must have been dreaming, or at least daydreaming, or you've engineered this account because you just fancy a good story. And that's all right. Just admit it. Any number of these classically amateurish rationalizations are formulated again and again, listener after listener, and knowing what I now know, none of these strike me as unfamiliar. If you look at these rationales altogether, each of them essentially forms the same core argument, that my account actively disregards, or even disrespects, the metaphysical boundaries of our known realm, and thus, these happenings mustn't have taken place in reality. Do you think this is my first time refuting this? I'm aware that there exists an intricate web of constraints that governs all that is perceptible. Physics, chemistry, biology, and too many others. These disciplines assign structure. They dictate what can or can't, what will or never will. These constraints, as illuminated through the sensory observations made by figures like Newton and Darwin, must preclude my story's legitimacy, the listener would cry. They might then proceed to adduce the peculiar qualities of my story to corroborate that very objection, saying things like, shadows cannot walk, nor can they produce light, after listening to me for all of 20 seconds. When I'd continue my recount, offering evidence of the exquisite life indigenous to that place, the listener may then assert that such unknowable beings have never been known to exist. This is the resistance I'm faced with all too often. This is the challenge I face for offering revitalizing spontaneity to a world we thought to be confined, chained, and predictable. The listener's objections, their skeptical cries of denial, reveal something terribly pernicious about their histories with such experiences. They draw patterns from my account to make-believe stories squawked out by children or the mentally ailing, be it of a charitable tooth-seeker, a nighttime napper of the sleeping, or any other tall tale that inevitably withers away once the fantastic era of adolescence passes us by. I'm sure I'm just one more buffoon spouting another such wives' tale to them. And to you, aren't I? But no, not in the slightest. This happened to me. I am not a child, nor am I one of the mentally ailing, nor am I devoted to the dissemination of make-believe tall-tale nonsense. And this is why, listen closely, to trivialize this particular account would be to actively neglect our rich repertoire of similar such experiences as a species. The place I ascended to isn't solely accessible by me, nor is it even new. It's a place frequented by peoples from all over. Yes, history itself would back me in a heartbeat. Any dissimilitude between my story and those of others who've inhabited this exalted realm, like the many recorded in the annals of every culture there ever was, is beyond negligible. Thus, the idea that ordinary people should still gawk and revel at such stories of specters, apparitions, and first-hand contact with suggestion of the divine demonstrates just how ill-versed so many of us are in the human history of such experiences, which some referred to as noetic encounters. From the manifold visions bestowed upon Siddhartha on that fateful day, to the reality-rattling revelation witnessed in the burning bush at Mount Oreb, we as a species have accrued a massive wealth of these exalted happenings. Each of them has proved central to our quest for meaning, as did my happening to mine. Yet, I can seldom find anyone with an open ear and an unfaltering eye to tell of my noetic encounter. This has irked me for a great many days. Listeners are so irredeemably entrenched in what reality will or won't permit. It's a suffocating shell we're in. Can't you see? Such metaphysical constraints around what can or cannot exist, what could or could never happen, they yield predictability, security, order. People appreciate, and have learned to require, that promise of order. I do just the same, but it gets to be a bore, does it not? It's no surprise, then, that I seek to extricate myself from those mundane constraints, to burst free from the dreaded shackles of materiality from time to time. And sometimes, I am granted the opportunity to do so, completely unsolicited by my own actions. Sometimes, a boon falls into my hands, a blessing capable of attenuating my pain within this material shell, the blessing of entropy, and with it, the promise of freedom. Who would I be not to share that with you? I suppose that now, finally, we are as primed as we ever will or won't be for you to hear of my account in this truer realm. I hereby exonerate myself from any future charges of failing to equip you for the sublime sequence that lies ahead. I'll share it with you, uninterrupted, and pay no further heed to what you may or may not believe. That is now in your hands, and this is your one chance at elevation. Let me tell you of that very early morning. I once found myself lying on my back in the middle of a fertile green field, eyeing an entity with which I was once familiar. Basked in the scorching, golden rays of the infant dawn, I could only describe it as a muscled human torso, made visible only by its coat of translucent, black nothingness. Beneath that torso, a pair of cerulean breeches was worn, the type any man would wear, and above that torso, a face that didn't matter. As if running late, it twirled around and started away from me on a heavy foot. The opaque matter that composed this upper body jiggled and sloshed with every step, with little regard for consistency. I clutched at the silky blades of green, gripping the damp soil at my sides, and sat up. His every stride emanated glassy torrents of black light at arbitrary angles as he lumbered further away, nearing the proximity of the forest beyond. Before long, his head and torso spun around to face me one last time as his breeches, and what may have been legs within them, continued forth into the trees autonomously from his reversed upper half, his countenance as empty and inscrutable as a boutique mannequin's. This was a face more icy and rebarbative than any human's visage could ever hope not to be. I cannot recall if that expression had ever once been any warmer. I then blinked once with all my deliberation in an effort to reproduce, and therefore confirm, the magnificence of the scene before me, and was successful in that regard. The figure remained just as perceptible to me as before. Our eyes met a final time, locking gazes, mine wistful and his exceedingly indifferent, and he then sauntered into the jittering trees, his rippling form mimicking their synchronized dance born of the gentle wind. I was then alone. He left, and I was free to examine the paradisal earth beneath my feet. And as I swiveled around, something else claimed my gaze too, resting atop that pure soil. Mere steps from where I had lain was an entity that proved almost identifiable, but whose size and composition defied the natural speculations that a biologist would be inclined to formulate. The foundation of the object itself was its giant rotches, a milky white spine of what appeared to be fresh bone. This vital vertebrate extended out to an exquisite 4 meters in length, and protruding from either side of it was a disheveled latticework of fine, narrow fibers, a disorderly arrangement of dark, twisted barbs and bent barbules. Fresh droplets of a certain marigold-tinged fluid damply coated the knotted barbules. Slowly, cautiously pressing my right hand to those unkempt fibers, the quick parting of the flesh of my palm ensued, my own vermilion juices revealing to me just how sharp the barbs were as I retracted my hand. The feeling could not be described as pain. It was a scarring completely devoid of sensation. Only then did I realize that my opposite hand was protected by a brown glove, a torn, withered one, but a covering nonetheless. Would I have been wiser to conduct my cursory examination with my left hand and not my right? Too late. I peered at the massive object once again. One might liken such an object, with the rotches and barbs with branching barbules, to a feather. But a feather belongs to a bird, does it not? What species, or even family, of gargantuan birds could have left this marred remnant behind? Turning my gaze upwards, the infinitely vast azure skies remained entirely vacant. Not a single screech or song pierced the tranquil scene, nor could a single entity be perceived in the trees or surrounding greens.
Looking for the source, are you?
The words floated over from the end of the clearing opposite to me, but I soon found that their owner had been summoned much nearer to my own being. A lithe figure, built similarly to myself, with a buttoned black shirt and admiral blue jeans.
You're looking in the wrong direction,
he said, unflinching in his gaze and unwavering in his tone. How would you know? You just showed up.
That I did.
Where else would I look? There must exist some large birds here, no?
Right. And I'm the one that just showed up.
A sardonic laughter erupted as he began eyeing the orange droplets sitting atop the object's barbules. After a perfunctory nod, he seemed satisfied with what lay before him. Who are you? I said finally. Derisive in his smirk and equally mocking in his amber eyes, the visage that now faced me was an open challenge, conveying to me at once what a futile approach mine had been. He spared me any more outbursts of hilarity, though not without some visible exertion, some conspicuous restraint. It was pity that was being cast my way, but it demonstrated at least a faint acknowledgement of my precariousness in this esteemed land. a land which I could not yet bring myself to enjoy. Beyond that pity, though, he gave me very little more. For a moment, his quips, coupled with his elusive mask, had dissuaded me from inquiring further about his precise identity or whether his credentials were adequate to make such brazen statements. He seemed to preemptively predict and parry any direct attempts at serious interrogation. This fortress of a mind inspired nothing if not silence, so silence we agreed to share. That is, until he decided that it be broken, because it was ultimately in his power, much like everything else, to break it.
Who am I, you ask? You are the one asking that question. In a land that you don't deserve,
he said, visibly amused, and said nothing more. If there existed some superior angle to questioning him, to overmastering his psychological feints and ruses, I lacked the ingenuity to recognize it. The deafening lack of words, of progress thereafter, continued to encroach upon my sanity. I could already sense that he'd continue to withhold any greater truths from me. He'd surely clutch at the realm's secrets like a miserly marquis shooing away the pitiful pleas of the indigent. And so I nearly held my tongue. But then, much like any street beggar pleading for another lease at life, I exercised the only option at my disposal. I thrust it again at the noble with my feeble, dulled saber anyway, letting loose from my lips a desperate jab of resounding resignation. Where would feathers come from, if not from birds? At the very least, the line didn't come off as sorry as my previous pokes, as shame is often foregone in the face of desperation. He smiled at my OTO's inquiries, then glared at me again in what might have been contemplation for a moment, sighing inwardly, his lips parted again.
You were able to accept the impossibly fluid composition of a shadowy half-man, a non-man, who dissolved into the woods. Can you not just acquiesce once more, and accept that you may never be able to rationalize this object's point of origin?
I glanced towards the forest for a while, taken aback by how much one must know to act so aloof, curious of how much the man must have known, of how long he must have been observing me, and of how I'd struggled to ascertain much of anything about this place. He at least exuded some indication of adopting the correct paradigm for comprehension, some semblance of knowing. And if, underneath that semblance, he sorely lacked whatever abstruse knowledge one required to truly understand, no one could tell. Certainly not myself. More and more did it seem that this realm dismissed the need for any divine governance, but even the wildest of realms are governed by reason, and nothing can communicate and embody reason quite like a person, an embodied ego. But such claims would not be corroborated here. This man had zero intention of employing or even respecting what we call rationality. I blamed him entirely for the hellscape that now resided within me. My thoughts collided with one another in tumult, understandably attributing my vexations to the one person that had actively chosen to obfuscate my situation even further. If this man were the marquis he presented himself to be, what business did he have masquerading as some lowly, elusive jester? If he had solely approached me to make a show of my helplessness, then who was watching? For whom was this show meant to entertain? Scanning the largely indiscernible grounds beyond the forest, I could just now distinguish a dark, rectangular edifice in the distance, in which an audience may have been gathered.
Oh, you're looking for where I came from now, are you? A fruitful effort that will prove to be, I'm sure. Logic has not yet failed you, has it?
I need not elaborate on how he continued to inspire irritation. I should note, though, that only when I chose to seek out a logical point of origin, a reasonable suggestion of some resident society, did the distant structure seem to reveal itself at all. Barren and empty it appeared, but by now I had learned better than to operate on false exteriors and phony judgments. But it mattered not what faulty assumptions I had already constructed regarding that edifice, as he then opted to awaken me from them by uttering two more brief phrases. It wasn't what he then communicated to me that alleviated my festering apprehensions per se, but more so the sincerity with which he delivered it.
Do not bother venturing out to that structure. That is not your place. This is.
He stood and gazed into the skies as if at something definite, but still, the vast blue void did not house anything of discernible interest.
There is a wish on its way, and it is not mine.
Was it worth probing at him again for more? I wondered. After so many gymnastic, unfailingly elusive exchanges, he now exhibited a new demeanor at once. One could liken this partial shedding of character to a clown who'd washed away his makeup and tucked away his fake nose. What does the wish look like?
Obligation,
he said simply. A deafening crash, more dissenting than the loudest of thunders, shattered the serene scene, the ground shaking erratically beneath us. A colossal orb of unknown composition had fallen atop that massive feather. An audible cry of asthmatic suffocation escaped the earth's lips as her lungs were decimated under the orb's unrelenting weight. Shortly after we regained our balance, the man extended his arm to me, his fingers pinching a leather glove identical to my own. He dropped it at my feet. This was my own, right? I said, my faculties still swimming in disarray from the orb's arrival. I snatched my glove back and equipped it hastily, sheathing my wounded palm. The man nodded, more animatedly this time.
It's imperative that you finally acknowledge it.
I glanced at the gigantic, fallen orb, and then at my retrieved glove. Which one? The man snickered and shook his head. I didn't wish for anything. Only as those words left me and permeated our Edenic glade did the man's words truly begin to register in my mind. The most repugnant scent that one could ever hope not to inhale, like a massive pastry stuffed with the entrails of 1,000 hemorrhaging rose petals, pervaded the scene before me. It was sweetly sickening, the smell of still pliable, ulcerated flesh that so commonly accompanied the excruciating process of birth. The composition of the orb's walls struck me as redolent of chapati dough, the same wheat dough that my mother would frequently mold into a palatable bread. Beige in its coloration and visibly malleable in its texture, the faintest stirrings of activity could now be discerned within those thick, membranous walls. Its numerous layers of doughy flesh ebbed and throbbed with every ill-defined movement of the embryonic being imprisoned within. Its appendages were apparently striking the orb's walls, thudding and bashing against them, though whether these appendages could be likened to human extremities, or the limbs of any scientifically documented entity, could not be ascertained. Whatever the case, these bodily protrusions quickly proved inadequate to burst forth from the oppressive membranes of the eggy sphere. I observed so many fruitless lunges and weak probes, too many pathetic attempts at extrication, as the infant being now lay still within the rigid membranes. Aggravated sobs and whimpers escaped whatever outlets it possessed, its vitality wholly drained from its useless appendages. Its showing of exploratory vigor was no more. Experience had taken its toll. Its posture now indicated a torpid submission to its sheltered existence as it receded into the membrane's rising floor, which itself was like a swelling leviathan mouth seeking to engulf the newborn in its quivering jaws. A stinging sensation probed my eyes as they darted around, searching for the masked man in vain, when a voice too celestial to be his began speaking, pervading the turbulent air and brilliant light. The words were these: "Earliest we will soon mourn, for a mind so frailly born, smothered incessantly by the walls of a finite prison, from which it was not equipped to have burst and risen." Only after my mind registered the last word did I recognize that the rhythm of those words matched those of my own mouth. It was I that had spoken, and so I opted to be much more deliberate with my wording of the second stanza. But as that mind lay impoverished and burning, I felt the faculties of my childhood returning, for one imagination can cultivate another, thus bringing us back to the garden together. Precisely as I had spoken, my wish was granted, as the grantor was none other than myself. It was the masked man who had resurrected the power I had once forfeited with my coming of age, with the associations and structurings of a world that I once thought I had known. I now knew that my exploration was far from over. From my right glove, a gleaming, iridescent pillar of light was generously emitted, raising the membranous walls of the orb and peeling them apart, like the most momentous parting of the Red Sea. Betwixt those finite walls, those primordial waters, the once imprisoned entity emerged, finally extricated from its shackles and free to explore the infinitely nourishing realm that belonged to both of us.